Hello and welcome to the Macon Atlanta podcast, where we are interviewing inspiring Atlantans talking about big questions, bold ideas, and better living. Our guest today is Brian McGowan. Brian is the president of Centennial Yards, building a sports, entertainment, and business district in the heart of downtown Atlanta in the area historically known as the Gulch. Brian has over 20 years of economic development experience working at all levels of government. He was appointed by President Obama as the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce, and prior to that was appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger to serve as the Deputy Secretary of Commerce for the state of California. In Atlanta, he served as both the CEO of Invest Atlanta and the CEO of Atlanta Beltline previously. This is a guy who loves taking on a transformational challenge. We covered the what and the why around the Centennial Yards development, why nothing has happened that's worked before in the Gulch, and why every Atlantan should be excited about what it means for all of us as we gear up for the 2026 World Cup and just to revitalize downtown. It's a more fun place to spend time than to be. So Brian, thank you very much for spending your time. Without further ado, enjoy this episode of Macon Atlanta. Okay, Brian, thank you for joining today.
Yeah.
Really excited about this conversation.
Me too. Yeah, happy you're here.
So I know that you have worked in the past for the governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then for President Obama. Would love to hear what stuck out about both of their leadership styles and maybe how that influences your leadership philosophy today.
Yeah, wow, big questions. I mean, two obviously iconic leaders and well-known human beings on this planet. I was earlier in my career when I worked in the Obama administration, and I was so honored to have been chosen as a political appointee. And I had this great opportunity to work in the White House. It was called I was running the Economic Solutions Team in the National Incident Command that was set up to respond to the BP oil spill, which was a long way to say my job was to help communities along the Gulf mitigate the impacts of the oil spill. And as a result, got to interact with the president regularly and a lot of his inner circle. A lot of people really close around him, and he's definitely the most extraordinary leader I've ever experienced. Just because he's the real deal, he's the full package, right? He's cool, he's smart, he's interesting, he's a policy expert, he knows what he's doing. So it was really fun to watch that. It was really the charisma around him that I thought was fascinating. But the one big lesson I took away from the Obama administration, it was from a friend of mine who was the COO for the White House, and he was also the chief operating officer for the campaign that brought President Obama to the White House. And he said we had 3 rules in the campaign, and these 3 rules then kind of transcended over into the administration. And one was treat everyone with respect. The other was build it from the bottom up. And so the idea there was, we at that level could, we're going to create new programs and policies, and we have to always remember how it affects the people that we're intending to help, because sometimes you have effects on people that you don't expect. So you have to be thinking about that. And the last one was no drama. Right? I think no drama, Obama. So every organization I've ever run since, when I meet employees for the first time, I share those with them, and I emphasize the last one, no drama, because drama is a energy killer, right?
Yeah.
It distracts people from the mission of the organization and it is really not productive, But earlier, Mike, I got to be around Arnold, which...
Can I just pause you for 1 second?
Yes,
I'm curious, what, if anything, did Barack Obama do to ensure there was no drama? Was there a practice that went along with that helped them accomplish that goal?
It was an expectation, I would say. So, the way we ran agencies, and I was running the U.S. Economic Development Administration, it was just kind of if there's a problem, you need to solve it and keep your focus on the American people and outcomes, and not on each other or your own egos. That's not what we were there for. We were there to deliver for the American people.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Arnold was just a larger than life character. Obviously, I think the most interesting thing about working for him was there's this celebrity thing, like everybody, even the first time I saw him, I was sitting in a room with him. I was like, oh my God, it's the Terminator. Like it's the governor of California walks in. But whenever he walked into a room, the air would be sucked out of the room. Everybody's attention was on him. He's just such a larger than life character. But the thing about Arnold is, I think the big takeaway was thinking big. He has a great book out right now called Be Useful, which I'm actually listening to on tape right now, and it's fascinating. I encourage your listeners to listen to it. Very practical advice on life, but one of the things was, think big, hold high expectations of yourself and others who are around you. And if we came to him with an idea that wasn't big, he wouldn't be interested. And he would even tell you, he says, it's not big enough. I'm like, it's got to be a bigger idea. Like,
what's an example?
Well, a funny example was we were doing a trade show in Hanover, Germany. So it was a big conference called CeBIT. And California was the partner state. So typically, a partner country. So typically, Germany picks a partner country, France or the United States. In this case, it was California, and California qualified because it was the sixth largest economy in the world. So it was really cool because you were with the governor, and he opens the show with their head of state, which was Angela Merkel, and so we're walking around with Angela Merkel and watching people react to him. But there was the host, the partner country, then would hold a party like on whatever Friday night. And we came into him with that idea, like we're going to have like surfers, and we're going to have the American soccer players who are from California that are playing in Germany. They're going to be here. And then we're going to have like a beach area, and we're going to be giving out cocktails. And he's like, well, the beach area. He goes, what do you mean? I go, well, it's going to have like a backdrop that looks like the ocean. And he goes, but where's the sand? We're like, well, I mean, there's no sand. He goes, no, there has to be sand. He says, you got to get sand. So we literally shipped in a beach, and we made a beach in the middle of this conference center. Like it wasn't big enough. He says, we're going to say we have a beach. It has to be an actual beach. So it's just a stupid example of how he always raised the bar higher. I think he did it for himself. He did it for people around him. But one of my favorite things about him was when the first time my sons met him. They were very young. My two youngest sons were, I want to say 5 and 3 or something like that. And, they kind of sheepishly walked up to him, and, they're looking up at, the Terminator. And he'd always, and I'd see him do this with other young kids. He'd say, stick your chest out and be proud of who you are, And my kids would do this. And just the act of doing that makes you feel better about yourself, So it's just, he was very inspiring to everybody he was around, especially if you worked for him. But if you were on the other side of the negotiating table with him, then not so much. So that's not a place where you wanted to be. But if you were with him and on his team and you worked for him, he was very inspiring. Wonderful to be around.
Anything particular, stylistically or otherwise, that you picked up from him that you've carried with you?
I think it's work ethic. He is obviously, in his book he talks about how he would work out twice a day. So, and he'd have to find multiple workout partners because most people can't work out twice a day. So he'd have to find like somebody else to work out with him in the evening because not everybody could do twice a day. So he talks a lot about, just outworking people, and just working harder, putting in the hours. The California, there was fires in San Diego at the time we were there, and he was down and out there on the ground, like making sure things happened and things were followed up on. He didn't take, everybody's answer as the final answer. He would double check and question them, and he asked a lot of questions. And I think that was just part of his upbringing of just being a really hard physical worker. And in fact, we would travel with him. He would expect you to be in the gym with him at 6 a.m. And I was younger in my career, so I'm in Germany or someplace. I'm probably out late at night. yeah, but did not want to be at the gym at 6 a.m. with a hangover. But you had to be, because if you weren't, he'd harass you all day long. So you were there no matter what.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And at this point, you've been in leadership capacities in public sector, private sector, and then kind of public sector, public-private partnership. What are some of those major differences that stick out when in terms of running different organizations that are focused, whether private sector, public sector?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, first I want to say, great things generally don't happen without public-private partnerships. In fact, we'll talk about Centennial Yards, but Centennial Yards is a giant public-private partnership. Sure. Because it just requires government and private sector to work together to make great things happen. The differences are, I think, a lot of it is related to the value of money. Where I think, in government, as a longtime government worker myself, on the one hand, you get a paycheck every 2 weeks, no matter what, right? So it doesn't matter if the company's profitable. You're an entrepreneur yourself, and that you're not necessarily getting a paycheck unless you make money. You got to bring money in order to get paid, right? Where government doesn't quite think like that, so the urgency isn't there. And earlier in my career, I was an economic developer in Southern California, city of Palm Springs, California, and part of my job in economic development was to help businesses through the permitting process, right? And so there's a couple of meetings I would be in where you could tell that the person behind the counter was the city worker was trying to do their job, but there was no urgency to it. It didn't matter to them if the business got open this week or next week. Whereas, as as an entrepreneur, that's a huge difference this week or next week. It's a difference between me paying my mortgage or not. So I think, in government, I always tried to, even though at that early part of my career, I hadn't worked in the private sector, but I understood that because I had family members who were owned restaurants and were entrepreneurs. And I knew that to be an entrepreneur and to run your own business is really difficult. And so I always tried to be I would say a translator or an interpreter. So I'd be in meetings with the planning department and the building department and the business person and trying to get everybody to get on the same page to get this business open as quick as possible. So I really think it's the value of money. Even this job I'm in now, time is money. Every day we're pushing the envelope to move faster and better and more efficiently. Whereas I don't know that government always thinks like that. They're just not incentivized to think like that.
Yeah, totally. And how did Atlanta come into your life? How did you come to be an Atlantan?
Yeah, good question. I was in the Obama administration. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce. And I'll never forget, I came home one day. You and I talked before this. I have 5 sons, and a couple of them were heading to college, and bills were piling up. I get home from work. We're renting an apartment in Old Town Alexandria, and I'm living the life, right? I'm in and out of the White House. I'm doing cool stuff. I'm flying around the country. And I walk into the apartment. My wife is sitting on the floor, coffee table in front of her, and she's got bills spread all over the top of the coffee table. And she looked stressed, and she looked like she had cried a little bit. And I said, well, what's going on? And she said, we're going to have to decide which car payment we're not going to make this month,
Ooh.
So for me, it was like, okay, time to get a real job. I have to go. I have to get my resume out, and probably I've had enough fun, and it's time to go, because those jobs don't pay a lot. I think a lot of people don't realize that whether you're a secretary or assistant secretary, deputy assistant secretary, or even worse, you're an advisor to the president, they don't make much money at all. Senior advisors to the president make $100,000 a year. I know that's a lot of money to a lot of people, but
relatively, cost, for a commensurate private sector role for someone that
exactly,
talented. Sure.
Exactly. So at that point, I got my resume out, and I started telling people that I probably needed to start looking for a job. But you have to be careful who you tell, because then they might shove you out the door. But I had friends in the White House, and I was like, hey, I'm trying to think about where I'd want to go. And somebody said, Atlanta just just elected this new hotshot young mayor named Kasim Reed. And I think he's looking for somebody to run his economic development agency. And I was like, oh, that's Atlanta. I said, I'd never really thought of myself of living in Atlanta. And I was like, oh, let me check it out. And I Googled him, and I think you could Google back then, 2011, yeah. And I looked up the job, and I was like, oh yeah, this looks like a cool job. It was President, CEO of the Atlanta Development Authority, which is now Invest Atlanta. I renamed it to Invest Atlanta. But
ADA is kind of taken.
ADA was like Americans with Disability Act, Assistant District Attorney, American Dental Association. But I also thought authority sounded scary. Atlanta Development Authority, and we're supposed to be helping businesses like expand and grow in Atlanta.
I want to deal with the
authority sounded scary. Anyway, we changed the name, but I threw my hat in the ring, and I ended up coming down for a few interviews, and I got the job. So that's how I ended up here.
Where did you grow up?
So I was born in the Bronx. So my family, I come from an Irish immigrant family. My mother is an Irish immigrant, immigrated to the Bronx in 1963 through JFK. So she landed at JFK, and she had two sisters living in the Bronx, and that's where she went. And then my father's parents are both Irish immigrants as well, and they came in the 1920s. They came separately. My grandmother came through Philadelphia, and then my grandfather came through Ellis Island. So his name is on the wall at Ellis Island. So I started in the Bronx and grew up in New Jersey.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it. And had you had much Atlanta experience before you came to run ADA /
None whatsoever. Okay. I think I visited Atlanta maybe twice. One of those times was for like 3 hours because I was in the Obama administration and came down, and there's an EDA office here in Atlanta, so we came down and visited and just headed back to the airport. So, and prior to that, I was here for a big real estate conference at the Georgia Congress Center, so never really experienced Atlanta at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you go about navigating, figuring out what's what, who's who? Obviously, you're supposed to be in a pretty high-profile role where you're playing a connector role, connective tissue, and enabling new transformative projects.
Yeah.
Like, how'd you approach making sure that you could do that and that happened?
It was harder than it looked, I think. Every city's different. Atlanta is as well. And me not being from the South and Atlanta being such a diverse city, I had a lot to learn. Its history, its civil rights history, and its position in the U.S. economy. And, I spent the last 3 years working with cities all across the United States. So I knew a little bit about Atlanta and had tons of respect for Atlanta. Wouldn't have moved here if I didn't think highly of Atlanta. But the first couple of years were difficult in just navigating the politics, trying to figure out who was aligned to who, and who didn't like who. Here I am on Mayor Reed's cabinet, and it's a big city politics. It's a bright blue island and a deep red sea. I'm trying to understand the state politics versus city politics, and you do some things right, and you other things you don't do right, and you run into the blade every once in a while, and you learn and you readjust. And but I think the greatest thing about that whole process of trial and error, trying to figure things out and leaning into it, because the Atlanta Development Authority at the time was not in good shape. It was insolvent, so it was an underperforming entity. So I had to come in and make some pretty drastic changes. So personnel changes and budgetary issues and just restructuring the whole organization, which those processes don't always make you the most popular guy in the room. And because you have to challenge status quo and what people are used to. But the greatest thing about all that was just the support I got from Mayor Reed and members of the city council and the board of Invest Atlanta, or the Atlanta Development Authority at the time. They were all very Atlanta embraced me in a way. I feel like this city and the people, like Atlanta's we say it's a welcoming city. It is. It really is. No place I've ever lived. Like Atlanta took me in, and despite my stumbles and tumbles, they lifted me up and threw me back in the game and encouraged me. So I kind of felt really empowered by the city of Atlanta.
Yeah. And how...
Not the city government, but Atlanta as a city.
Yeah, the collective.
Yeah.
How tactically did you go about learning the civil rights history? And when we think about the explosive growth of the city and how many people are coming here, and I always hear about how important it is that folks understand the cultural fabric of the city that they're moving to. And I believe that. And I'm also curious, how practically should one go about that?
Well, besides, if you live in Atlanta, I don't care if you just moved here or not, and you haven't walked on the Atlanta University Center campus, then shame on you. If you haven't visited the King Birth House or the gravesite, shame on you. If you haven't driven by MLK, Martin Luther King's house where he raised his family on Sunrise in Vine City, then shame on you. You gotta go visit these places. And Tom Houck does a civil rights walk up and down Auburn and Edgewood, and like, it's one of the richest, coolest parts about living in Atlanta, in my opinion, is we're globally known for our civil rights, prowess and leadership over so many decades up till now. But one of the coolest opportunities I had when I first got here was I went to graduate school in the Claremont Graduate University, and one of my classmates had the Andrew J. Young fellowship. She was the Andrew Young Fellowship. And I was like, Andrew Young. Now, I remember my mother talking about Andy Young when I was a kid. She was a big fan, and the Irish had their own civil rights issues for decades, obviously. So Andy Young was an inspiration to my mother. And so I started reading about him and understanding. I obviously knew who he was, but didn't really dig into it. So this is when I was in graduate school in California, never thinking about coming to Atlanta. So I'm in Atlanta maybe 3 months, and I have a good friend, one of my closest friends. His name is John Hope Bryant. And John Hope Bryant runs an international nonprofit called Operation Hope, and they do great work. I encourage your listeners to look them up. So I'm at his house on a Saturday. He invited me over to his house for like a late breakfast. I'm at his house at like 10 a.m. We're talking. I'd known him for years prior, so it was just kind of getting to know each other again after not seeing him in a while. And he says, "Have you met the ambassador yet?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." He goes, "Well, he knows you're here running Invest Atlanta. He wants to meet you." I'm like, "Oh, that would be fantastic." Wow. He goes, "How about now?" I was like, "Oh, no, not now." It's like 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I am not mentally or emotionally prepared to meet Andy Young. He's like, no, it'll be fine. So he picks up his cell phone. He calls. He goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, he's here. He goes, yeah, okay, I'll take him over now. He hangs up the phone. He goes, we're going over to his house right now.
A house visit.
It was his house where he lived, for even while he was a civil rights leader and he was mayor, and there's an addition onto the house. But anyway, we go to the house, and I am beyond nervous. Like I'm mad at John for making me do this. I'm like, I'm not ready for this. I have pictures from this visit too, which are pretty funny because I was like a deer caught in the headlights in the pictures. But we go into his living room. And there's like the old part of the house, and there's a newer addition on at the back, and we're sitting in this little living room. And I'm being polite, and I'm asking questions, and I can't believe this is actually Andy Young. And I asked the question. I go, "So you held civil rights meetings here in this house?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Matter of fact, when we did the addition onto the house, we found an old FBI tap onto the phone line that came into the house." And then he laughed. He goes, "The contractor said, what do you want us to do with that?" And he said, "Just leave it." He goes, "I told them just to leave it." So it's still there.
They can keep listening if they have been for this long.
It was so cool. And I go, "So you held meetings like in your house?" And I go, where did you hold those meetings?" And he goes, "Right here, right where we're sitting." Just the chills of like these civil rights meetings being held like right where we were sitting. So for me, that really kind of, I would say, lit my fire about Atlanta and, its history in civil rights and its global leadership in civil rights. And you go to the Ebenezer Church, this tiny little church, and you stand and, it's not a big church. People don't realize that. And you're looking at the podium where this man changed the world from this podium in Atlanta. Pretty remarkable and inspiring.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Connecting some of the dots. I have a story that without the Atlanta Development Authority becoming Invest Atlanta, there's no Beltline, and how many people who are listening to this, enjoy the Beltline. And now it's easy to kind of see the Beltline as an unstoppable force. But I know that it was not always assured that each of the neighborhoods was going to sign up and say yes, that they were going to get the land and the approval and otherwise. Was there ever a time when that felt especially on the rocks? And how did you all navigate that, making sure that that transformational project could kind of stay on path and become what it has and is becoming?
So I can't take any credit for that because that all happened before I got here. So people like Ryan Gravel and Kathy Willard and Brandon Sutton and all these amazing leaders did all that work, all that. Shirley Franklin. Now I'm getting myself in trouble because I'm naming names. There's a lot of people around this community that, did something very difficult. They sold a vision, which was not so easy to communicate, in that even when I came to Atlanta as the CEO of Invest Atlanta, and the Beltline is actually a subsidiary of Invest Atlanta, it took me a minute to understand what the Beltline was. Even after they took me out, and we hadn't poured any concrete yet. The East Side Trail was just getting started in 2011, right when I got here. So it was like the first real part of the Beltline. But prior to that, they were doing bus tours where they were holding up artist renderings. So they'd stop the bus on a bridge and they'd hold up an artist rendering and say, this kudzu covered corridor is going to look like this one day, you know? And it was a real grassroots effort that seems to me Herculean, how they were able to achieve it and create the tax allocation district, which is very, very difficult to do legally, and get it going. It was pretty remarkable. I showed up in 2011. It's kind of like being born on third base, where the concrete was already being poured. So my job was just to keep it going, and I eventually became the CEO of the Beltline, and my job was to just accelerate it, get it going faster. That's kind of what I felt like, and try to honor and keep to the original vision as much as possible.
Yeah. And what about that Beltline experience ties in with Centennial Yards? And do you see things that are analogous there? And I promise we're going to get to what a Centennial.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So that's a good question. So when I was considering taking the job that I have now, President of Centennial Yards Company, I called John Hope Bryant, a good friend of mine, who I mentioned earlier. And I said, what do you think? And, he's like, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. And he's friends with Tony Ressler, and Tony Ressler is one of the investors in Centennial Yards. And actually, John's an investor as well. So he was like, I think it would be great. And I said, yeah, it's like the Beltline. Like it's a $5 billion project. He said, I think it's bigger than the Beltline. And I was like, well, how's that? And he goes, because everybody that comes to Atlanta will go to Centennial Yards. Not everybody that comes to Atlanta is going to end up on the Atlanta Beltline. I know there's going to be people who are listening saying, boo, hiss, that's not true. Everybody goes to the Beltline. I challenge that. I don't think everybody, you come here for a convention, I don't know if you have time to go to the Beltline, let's put it that way. But you're definitely going to end up in Centennial Yards. So Centennial Yards is sort of like our Times Square, right? It's going to be like our Times Square. It's going to be a place where people are going to want to go and be seen and take their selfie to prove to everybody they were in Atlanta, behind some artwork that says Atlanta or something like that, something iconic to Atlanta. So I think the Beltline, both are transformational projects, right? That's a word I think is overused, especially when it comes to real estate. But the Beltline going through 44 neighborhoods and being 22 miles, and I didn't get the Beltline until I rode it for the first time on a bike with a friend of mine whose name is Angel Poventude. And Angel Poventude was continues to be a Beltline advocate, a very early Beltline advocate, but he lives on the Beltline. So we jump on the trail that existed, the West Side Trail, behind his neighborhood, and we went right, so clockwise. And we rode, and the whole Beltline wasn't there yet. So there was parts that were fenced off, and there were parts that you had to carry your bike through a mud hole or, up a embankment. But we continued all the way to the East Side Trail back and came back around to his house in the other direction.
Yeah.
That was when it kind of hit me. I was like, oh my God, we left and went in that direction, and we came back in this direction. And we went through 44 neighborhoods. Yeah. And we stopped for a beer, and we stopped for a burrito, and we experienced all of Atlanta. It kind of felt like, what a great way to experience a city. that you just rode through 44 neighborhoods and experienced and ran into people and talked to people and stopped at shops. And it was like such an amazing day. And we did it all in, I think it was like, 2.5 hours. Now, we could ride it faster than that. We stopped for beers, I said, and burritos. But it was just such a cool experience to be able to kind of do it. And that's what really lit me up about the Beltline. I was like, this is cool. When you could ride it in a full loop, I think then it's called the Beltline because a Beltline is a loop.
Totally.
So once you can do this, you really understand the value of it.
Yeah, I have some pre-pandemic pictures south of Grant Park on a long, what then was a trail.
Oh, yeah.
And we took them for our future kids, which have now materialized. Blessing.
Congratulations.
And it was either, we said either this is going to be a failed experiment that you learn about, or you're going to be like, why didn't you buy the land around here?
Right.
It's definitely trending
bought
towards the latter.
Seriously.
It's broke, I'll tell you about it
I wish
later.
I had done that.
Yeah, totally. But I'm with you that there's probably not the singular picture that you got to take on the Beltline like there might be at a place like Centennial Yards.
Yeah,
and if you're watching this, if you're not watching this, you should. We record some great video. But if you're watching, right now we're looking out, you can see Mercedes-Benz Stadium and then, largely what is a hole in Atlanta, which won't always be. And so can you tell us about Centennial Yards?
Yeah, sure.
So project.
Centennial Yards is the 50-acre hole in the heart of our city. We had Andy Young in here a year and a half ago, and he was gazing out the window, and he just put his hand on his heart, and he said, "This has been the hole in my heart since I was mayor." Which kind of, I had a colleague there, Bridget Broyard, and we both felt the weight of the moment, which was we have to fill the hole in Andy's heart. Let's get to work.
Pressure.
No pressure, right? I mean, literally, I think my knees buckled when he said that, but it was also so inspiring. And clearly what he meant was, our downtown is in large part in the state that it's in, which isn't great because we have a big 50-acre hole in the middle of it that prevents it from being walkable, that disconnects neighborhoods. And, when the main feature of your region of 6 million people is a 50-acre parking lot, I think that also reflects on the values of the place as well. So I think this whole thing started with Tony Ressler. Tony Ressler bought the Atlanta Hawks, and I think about 7 years ago. And Steve Koonin, who is the president of the Atlanta Hawks, and really deserves so much credit for keeping the dream alive for Centennial Yards for so many years as the incentives were being put in place and his property was being acquired. But he tells this great story that Tony made the decision to buy the Hawks in the arena, and he walked out to get into his SUV to take him back to his plane, and he steps up on the running board of the SUV and looks over the roof into the hole across the street and turns to Steve and says, what's that? And Steve says, "That's the Gulch." Tony, being from LA, says, "What's a gulch?"
Say more.
Yes, what's a gulch? And Steve goes, "I told him that's where people tailgate." And Steve goes, "It wasn't a great answer, but I couldn't think of anything else. It's what happened there." And then Tony said, "I want LA Live there." So LA Live was like one of our country's first sports adjacent entertainment districts. It's in downtown Los Angeles next to Staples Center, or now it's Crypto Arena,
Crypto Arena,
and the LA Convention Center. Parking lots underutilized, and they created this great entertainment complex right next to it. Ours is going to be way better. Ours is bigger, nice. But it was the inspiration. So Tony gets on his plane. He calls his brother Richard Ressler, who's one of the founders of CIM Group, and says, "Get your team out here and start looking at this property." So they did, and they created a master plan and acquired the property, and there was easements and air rights, and there's active rail lines and MARTA tunnels and remnant parcels of property. Very difficult site to acquire, and then master planned it for, again, 50 acres. We could build up to 12 million square feet. It'll be more likely 8 million square feet. So mixed use, so office, residential, 3,000 apartments, office space, food and beverage, hotels. We have apartments under construction now. We have a hotel under construction. We just made the big announcement a couple of weeks ago about the new next phase, 8-acre entertainment district, 4 new buildings, and the project's underway. We're moving very fast right now.
Yeah. It's super exciting. I want to look back before we look forward. Why has there been a hole in the heart of Atlanta for 50 years? Like, why hasn't anything worked there, and what makes this time different?
So first of all, these were rail yards. So since Atlanta was founded, in fact, Atlanta was founded right here in this site. People don't realize this, but underneath the CNN deck, where many people have parked, there's a track configuration called the Circle Y track. It's where all the tracks came together in the southeastern United States. So it's why General Sherman came down and burned Atlanta, because by destroying the rail infrastructure here, you could cripple the South. And so that track configuration still exists there. And then in the decades following, the rail yards around those rail lines grew, and downtown became sort of congested by all these rail lines and trains and belching steam and smoke. And then the viaduct roads were built over it because it was just clogging up downtown. So if you look downtown, you come downtown, there's like bridges over Centennial Yards, and that's why they were there. And then the rail yards went away. It started going away in the 70s and were basically completely gone by the 80s, and it was paved over, turned into parking lots, not super accretive from a tax perspective or a job creation perspective for anybody other than, great for tailgating for, Falcons games, et cetera.
Yeah, and if you're the one person who owns the parking lot, but like
then that's actually a good business. So the property itself never had the infrastructure to support what we're building. So there's no water, sewer, power. So typically, our lights just went off. Okay. There we go. All right. There you go. There's life in here.
Yeah. Arnold would want us to stretch.
Stretch. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Typically, cities build all of that, and then private developers come in and they build the buildings and they plug them into the street that has all of the outlets there to plug the water, sewer, power into. In this case, that it didn't exist. And so that's one reason why the site was never built on. We actually found an article from a 1982 edition of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that outlined 12 attempts to develop this property that never came to fruition. Wow. A lot of that is timing. A lot of that is financial markets. A lot of that is just appetite of a developer to take on that kind of risk. And I mentioned earlier, there's easements and there's air rights, there's active rail lines, there's a MARTA tunnel. Every government entity seemed to own a remnant parcel over the last 100 years. That all this had to be acquired. There were 12 different owners, in fact, so they had to be negotiated with. And so there was an agreement with the city, a development agreement with some incentives. There was also an enterprise zone created through the state of Georgia to create basically a way to capture the sales tax that's generated on site for a certain amount of time in order to kind of offset the cost of infrastructure. All that had to happen, but I think the real secret sauce was a guy named Tony Ressler happens to buy the Atlanta Hawks. He happens to have a brother named Richard Ressler, who is one of the founders and principals of a company called CIM Group that likes to take on these more risky, more difficult urban projects. So it just, the stars and the moon aligned, I think, and the timing was right. And like I said, we're full steam ahead right now.
Yeah, totally. And it strikes me, tying back to what you said about Arnold, the situation in downtown. If we didn't think big, it wouldn't be a big enough magnet to get people down to downtown. And then if you just put, one-off something new downtown and there's not foot traffic, that doesn't have enough oxygen to survive. But if it is a big enough magnet to be the central attraction, then maybe it can be the thing that brings other people downtown.
Yeah, and I think it's happening. If you look at the founders of Atlanta Tech Village, David Cummings and John Birdsong, and they just bought, the South Downtown portfolio, 50 historic buildings. Shanil Lalani bought Underground. CP Group bought the CNN Center. This is all kind of after CIM made this big commitment. Now, you always have to give Arthur Blank, I think, the original credit, because he invested a $1.87 billion stadium in downtown Atlanta. So it really started with that. You go back to Bernie Marcus and the Georgia Aquarium. There's been this really decades long, almost philanthropic investment in downtown, philanthropic, and also people like Arthur, who's a great philanthropist, but also people who just really believed in downtown and believed in Atlanta and didn't want to leave downtown Atlanta to die, knowing that that's not good for the entire region. And all the way through to, CIM Group making this big economic splash that I think causes, as Egbert Perry, the CEO of Integral Group, called a kind of ripple effect. And so now you're seeing like the Georgia Will Congress Center. They own a bunch of property around their facility. They're now thinking about how do we better utilize that. So suddenly we're seeing a lot of reinvestment. As you can see, there's 2 construction cranes up now. I don't know if you can see that from the cameras, but
the cranes are in the background.
All right, good.
Nice.
That's a historic site, folks. Very exciting, and there'll be 2 more in September. So I can't wait to get the drone shots of 4 construction cranes in the Gulch. And I think it's an inspiring and it's a historic site for a lot of people. We literally have had city leaders here in the office looking out the window with tears in their eyes and saying that's a site I never thought I would see. So it's an exciting time for us.
Yeah, it's cool to see the arc of transformation. And my first job was in the Georgia Pacific building, and started in 2012. And we kind of wouldn't walk. It's not that we wouldn't walk, but there was nothing really to do. And then you think about Georgia State buying all that land around there, and there seems to be so much more activity.
Yeah, of course, Georgia State. And I mean, they're also one of the original investors in kind of getting downtown. I mean, big investor, obviously, and believers in downtown. So it's coming. It's going to take time, but I think we're finally starting to see the fruits of all that labor and investment and vision for so many years. You're starting to see it when companies like CIM and Richard and Tony Ressler coming by and dropping this kind of a investment in a place like downtown Atlanta. That's because other people did before them. All these things kind of build on each other. So
and you mentioned the fact that there's a big parking lot there maybe being reflective of the values of a place. How would you articulate the values of Atlanta, and particularly downtown? And then do you perceive those to be shifting and evolving, and what does that feel like?
One of the, I think, transformative principles, I would say, of Centennial Yards is, right now, if you come downtown, you're probably coming down for a game or a concert, right? Or you're here for a convention. Like I was, my first time, I think I was here in 2002, 2003, I was here for a convention. And so you're coming down for that event, as if it's a game or a concert, and everybody kind of arrives at the same time. Because there's not a lot to do before, right? So there's a couple of restaurants, but they get pretty crowded. And this is going to change the way people come downtown. So you'll come early. So you're not all going to arrive and be sitting in the same traffic at the same time. I don't know about you, but I like to pregame before a concert. So, do a little bar hopping and have some fun, then go to the concert. And then after the concert, right now, or the game, everybody leaves at the exact same time because there's nothing to do. I think this is going to stagger that. So people are not going to have this, do I want to go fight traffic to get in and park and then go to the thing and then get in my car and get stuck in traffic to get out? Like, those are things that go through my head when somebody goes, hey, let's go to a Falcons game. It's like, it's so much work to get down there. And, this is going to change that kind of thinking, I think, because it's going to make it easier to come downtown. And then obviously when you come downtown, you're going to have a massively different experience because there's going to be so much more to do. I think right now downtown is, it's tough for convention goers in particular because there's not a lot to do. And I've had friends who visited, I just had the mayor of Tacoma, Washington's a good friend of mine. She was here for a U.S. Conference of Mayors a meeting, and she goes, Brian, the downtown is just, so, at the end of the day, we have to all get in Ubers and go to, Buckhead for drinks or dinner. I was like, yeah, I know. That's what we're going to fix that. We're going to fix that. So I think in the next, those 2 buildings open next summer, and there'll be 5 restaurants between those 2. So and there's a Wild Leap Brewery who's already open in one of our buildings. So people's experience, that combined with what the Atlanta Tech Village guys are doing in South Downtown, it's already changing. This change is coming imminently.
I was going to ask.
It's within sight.
If you can tell us a little more about what steady state will look and feel like in terms of what can we do,
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
when is steady state? Like when does
Yeah,
that,
right.
how far away are we
It
from?
depends on who you ask. Well, like I said, this will be a vibrant mixed-use environment. So there'll be, bars and restaurants and fun experiential retail type of cool things to do. There'll be a number of different kinds of hotels with different price points, some boutique hotels and some larger hotels. That's a 300-room hotel on the right there that's under construction. Will be complete next summer. There'll also be 3,000 apartments, so this is going to be a new neighborhood. And then we'll have all the neighborhood serving retail, post office, doctor's office, things like that. People always ask about supermarket food. Definitely, there's going to be food in supermarkets and pharmacies and things like that in here as well. So the way I look at Centennial Yards is it's going to be, although it's one thing within it, there'll be different neighborhoods within it. So what we're building right now is going to be the heart of the entertainment district. So that's 4 buildings, 500,000 square feet, a fan zone plaza area in the middle of all of it that can hold 5,000 people. And matter of fact, that's where we're going to do the Peach Drop. We'll be there for 7 years at least.
Got it. Cool.
And so that will have energy and excitement and music. And then as you move into the other sections or parcels, there'll be more of a neighborhood. So there'll be a different scale and a different feel. So as you move around Centennial Yards, you'll have different feelings within itself because it's 50 acres. It's pretty big in and of itself. And then you have South Downtown and the center now, the former CNN Center, now called the Center. CP Group is working on that, and underground not far away. So people when they come downtown, they're gonna have lots of different you can go to Castleberry Hill. Castleberry Hill is fantastic. I don't think people really fully understand how cool Castleberry Hill is. If you haven't been there, you should go there. Great restaurants and fun things to do, and lots of art galleries and other things like that. So every neighborhood's going to have a different feel, and you're going to have a completely different experience when you come downtown.
And what do you want regular people in Atlanta to think about Centennial Yards? Like folks who are listening to this, like how can they participate?
Yeah.
How can they benefit? Is there an investment opportunity, or is it just something that's sweet that they're going to be excited to patron eventually?
Yeah, it'll be something sweet that they're going to have a lot of fun. They'll spend time. This will be some place where when they have friends or family visiting from out of town, you're going to take them to Centennial Yards. Like I said, it'll be like Times Square. You go to New York, you got to go to Times Square. But the biggest thing that I want Atlantans, first of all, I want Atlantans to understand that this is happening. This is not a dream. This is not talk. There's lots of talk about real estate projects in Atlanta over the last 40 years, 50 years. This is actually happening. It's underway, as you can see out the window. So it's coming. We encourage you to follow us on social media and tell us what you like and tell us what you don't like, what you want to see more of or less of. We'd love to hear your voices that way. But also know that what's really important to me is that we build something that is unique to Atlanta. So I feel like if we build something that could be in any city in America, you're sitting in the middle of it and you're looking at a Fuddruckers and a Starbucks, right?
Sure.
Then we failed. It needs to be something that can only happen in Atlanta. And by that, I mean Atlanta culture. So art and music and people and food. It has to be the right mix of national retailers and local restaurateurs and retailers and public art and just that overall feel. Music. Live music is so critical, I think, to the success of this project. And music is something that Georgia does really well. I think arguably better than any other state in the United States. People unfortunately don't know that, but if you know the history of music in Georgia, it's more impressive than any other state. Let's just call it what it is. But there's no place you can go in Georgia and park your car and bar hop and listen to different kinds of live music. We want to see a lot of that liveliness in Centennial Yards. So my promise to people listening and people who love and care about Atlanta is we're going to do something very unique to Atlanta culture.
Yeah. And what voices have you gotten in the room, or do you need to get in the room to make sure that it does reflect that authentic Atlanta culture? How do you go about building that?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, besides the fact that we have, we have an extremely diverse team here working on Centennial Yards. In fact, I'd argue the most diverse development and construction team in Atlanta. race, gender, et cetera. And we're very proud of that and very intentional about that, very intentional to make sure that the people actually building the project are understand the value of Atlanta and understand Atlanta culture. I should also mention, as a side note, that we made some big commitments with regards to affordable housing. So we will build 20% of all the units will be affordable at 80% of AMI for 99 years. We've also committed that 38% of our contractors will be minority female business enterprises. So that's a big amount of money. Sure. And we're at 38% right now, 39.5%, I think. So we're actually exceeding that goal. We're also committed to hiring 25% of all the entry-level jobs in building Centennial Yards will go to residents of the city of Atlanta. So we want to make sure that it's built by people who actually live here. All of those voices and opinions and skills and thoughts from MFBE to all of the people we hire are gonna help create and make sure that it's unique to Atlanta. We also work with all the NPUs and community groups surrounding the property. I'm on the board of CAP, Central Atlanta Progress, and the ACVB. So we have city council people through here constantly getting thoughts and opinions. And as I said, we listen to people's voices on social media. So we'll continue doing all of those things. And again, anybody listening, please, if you have ideas or thoughts, let us know.
Yeah. Group project is the word that keeps coming to mind.
Group project,
which I know gets bandied about
the mayor
a lot.
talks about group projects, yeah.
One of the things happening, whether it's a group project or not, the World Cup is coming.
Yeah.
Where are we
straight at us
to where we need to be for this many months out?
Yeah.
And I have a perception that it feels oddly quiet in terms of our kind of collective awareness and discussion and focus on such a major event.
Yeah.
Do you share that perception? And
I do. I do think we should be running around with our hair on fire a little more here. I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of effort. We clearly have a lot of effort going on. We want to deliver this new entertainment district, this 8 acres by World Cup, mid-2026. So you can imagine, like, we're running around with our hair on fire, that's for sure.
And can you even tell for folks listening, like, what all is going to happen in Atlanta for World Cup? Like, what is coming down the pipe?
Yeah, so mid-June to mid-July, we are going to have 8 games. We're 8 World Cup games here. So you think about that in terms of there's going to be people here from 16 countries around the world for an entire month. I said, there goes the lights again. We got to move around. Let's stretch.
Good stretch break.
The economic impact, I don't know exactly. People say it's 3 or 4 or 5 Super Bowls. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's a lot. So there's a lot of people here coming from all over the world, and that's a big opportunity for us to show ourselves off to the world. And subsequent to things like this, and the Olympics proved this is. I think everybody probably knows somebody that moved here for the Olympics, ended up staying here. So, and companies as well. So we execute this well, and things come off where people are impressed with our city, then it'll bring investment as well. So I feel like this is a huge, huge opportunity that we all group project, as the mayor says it. And I know the mayor's team is working on this, and I've had conversations with the Transportation Commissioner and Public Works Commissioner. They're resurfacing streets. They have a plan. They're working towards making sure our downtown presents better than it does now, but it's going to take more than that. I know the Sports Council, which is run by Dan Corso at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, he and his team are all over it. It's a big opportunity for us because in addition to the 16 countries and people who are going to be here, there's also going to be people here who are going to use Atlanta as a home base to travel to the rest of the country. So they're going to pick a U.S. city to say that's going to be where we're going to stay until we know where our team is going. And then they're going to fly from here to New York. They're going to fly from here to Dallas or Seattle or wherever. So it's even bigger when you think about the impact than just the 16 teams. There'll be other people, and Atlanta being the busiest airport in the world, and probably cheaper hotel rates than New York City. I think a lot of people are going to come here to do that. Yeah. So, we got to get our stuff together, as they say.
If you could wave your magic wand, like what running around with hair on fire would be happening that isn't happening, or what hair would be more on fire?
Yeah, good question. I think I mentioned earlier, I know the cities, like there's no time to build new facilities like we did for the Olympics. We're not going to build dorms, and we're not going to, not that we need dorms, but if construction cranes aren't in the air now, you're not going to build anything. So it's a matter of, well, what else can we do? And what that means is, clearly, public safety has to be high on the list, upgrading lighting and signage in downtown, the tree canopies and making sure that our trees look good and are healthy, and lighting poles and standards are upgraded and painted, and sidewalks are power washed and trees are trimmed. Like it's sort of like, we have the neighborhoods coming over for dinner on Friday night, and we need to, like, how can we get our house looking? Like, we're gonna have to put some coats of paint on some stuff, make sure the plumbing's not leaking, vacuum the carpets, shampoo some things. And I think that's kind of what we need to think about, is that there's lower hanging fruit that we have plenty of time to do. But what my concern is mostly based on is last summer I went to the Women's World Cup in New Zealand and Australia, in Auckland and Sydney. And I was there with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. There was a team of people that went. And we, in both cities, met with a lot of government officials and city, county, state officials. And I asked them all the same question: what would you have done differently? And they all had the same answer, which is we should have started sooner. So you just can't start soon enough. I'm confident Atlanta's going to be prepared. Atlanta's good at this. We've done this before. We've done Super Bowls and Final Fours. Shoot, we did the Olympics. Like, we know how to prepare ourselves for the world. I'm getting anxious that there's not enough energy and excitement being focused on it right now. I'm confident that it's going to happen. I'm confident we're going to be ready, but now's the time.
Yeah. What's the tipping point that'll get us there?
Oh, that's a good question. The tipping point that will get us there, I think FIFA officials will start coming to Atlanta next month or two, is my understanding. And once we have more clarity from them on what they want and where the fan zones are going to be and how many do they need and what their expectations are, I think that will get people going. I also know that all the World Cup cities, U.S. World Cup cities, mayors' offices are all talking and working together. So I think when one city sees another city starting to do stuff and move, I think it won't be left behind. Cities, as we see, like in Super Bowls, when mayors bet who's going to win. I think mayors will be. Mayors are naturally competitive, and I think they're going to want to make sure that their city shows off better than other cities in America. So I think you're going to see all that in the next 6 months.
Okay. Would love to talk about design philosophy and the time horizon that you're designing for when you plan a project like this. And I'll read a quote because I keep coming back to this quote. And that is, if we have learned one thing from the history of invention and discovery, it's that in the long run, and often in the short one, the most daring prophecies seem laughably conservative. And so the question there is, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you think about getting into and out of the project in downtown. Are we designing for rideshare? Are we designing for flying cars? I was with Uber when the Brave Stadium was getting built, and it's like those were some of the first stadiums where we were really designing with rideshare in mind, and maybe even not to the extent that they wish they had. They wish they in retrospect. So, like, how do you think about that designing between today and 10 years from now versus 50 years around? That hole in the city is going to be there for 100 years as this.
Yeah, I refer to it as future proofing, as we're building a city within a city is the other way we kind of describe this. So like everything from, we talk about conduit and we say, how much conduit do we need? And somebody comes up with a number and then we say, we need to double that. Whatever we think we need to double it. VTOL for vertical takeoff and landing, I think is definitely going to be a thing. We've challenged our architects to think about that. What does that look like? How do we design structures that can support that kind of a thing? We are designing a giant rideshare plaza underneath the entertainment district down there as a result of conversations we had with our friends at the Braves. Like one of the questions I asked them was, what would you have done differently? And they said two things. They said more shade. It gets hot in Atlanta in the summer, right?
Totally.
Right?
+1 on that.
Yeah, +1.
You're trying to take a kid, like a small child there, and you're like, all right, where are we going to bake?
Yeah, or my 80-year-old father who's coming next week. Like, I got to take him to a Braves game. It's really hot in between those buildings. And the other was rideshare. As you pointed out, when they were designing that, rideshare was just sort of becoming a thing, and I don't think anybody had it fully figured out. So we are designing these really cool shade structures over the fan zone that kind of connotate or draw the image of a tree, because we're a city in the trees, so there'll be kind of tree-like structures. And that rideshare plaza is critical, as we don't want to clog up the streets on the surface. Downtown is already hard enough to get in and out of. And so you will go down to terra firma level, 40 feet down. There'll be a giant kind of airport-style rideshare plaza with lots of cars being circulated, and those cars will enter and exit at the lower level, so they won't be on the streets above, which, by the way, I think is great for all of the big event facilities. I know we had conversations with the Falcons. They were thrilled by that. A question I asked the Falcons was, what would you have done differently in your facility? One of the things they said that stuck with me was we should have built more bike lockers, was the comment. Wow. I know you rode your bike here. That's only going to increase micro-mobility and electric bikes. And we're thinking about that. We want to create a really cool bike locker system. We're trying to engineer, like, how do you get people down 40 feet down without, going,
totally.
like breaking land speed records to get down there. Like with your 7-year-old, you don't want to just say, good luck, son, right? So there's, Europe has figured this out. They have really cool concepts and ideas around this. So we're thinking about that as well. And then, the other is just, you talk about time horizon, economies change. Everybody asks us all the time about office and, like, are you going to build office? The answer is, of course, we're going to build office. And why would you build office? Nobody's coming back to office. We don't believe that. We know people are going to come back to the office, meaning, companies continue to grow and continue to, even if they have a certain percentage of the workforce working from home or remotely, at some point that growth is going to catch up to their current office needs, and they're going to need more office. That's just math. So that's going to happen. We expect to do that in the future. And in the meantime, we're focused on creating, basically placemaking. It's like the bars and the restaurants and the residential and the hotels, everything else. The economy is really strong and supportive in those areas. So we're continuing to kind of focus on that. But, our goal is to basically have all of Centennial Yards either complete, under construction, or about to be under construction by 2030. Yeah. So we're moving light speed fast here, And the other challenge we had, you mentioned design and architecture earlier, is we want to create a human scale place that people tend not to hang around giant tall buildings. You don't see, like, cafes successful around the base of large buildings in most cities in America. And some cities might be an exception to that, like New York City, because they're all tall buildings. But we want to make sure that the place feels comfortable and safe for humans. So that's everything from the scale of the buildings to the arrival experience. So, like, we don't want, for example, when you arrive at a parking structure underneath Centennial Yards, that you feel like you're back of house. Like, that should feel front of house. It should feel like I arrived. You get out of the car, it's lit and it's comfortable and it feels safe, and there's murals, it's painted, there's digital signage clearly marking how you get up into the space, the fan plaza. So we're going to be very deliberate about the customer service experience from the minute you pull into your parking garage to you're up into your restaurant above.
Yeah, and I'm still anchored on VTOL, so vertical takeoff and landing. If we're having this conversation and my kids are in college and flying cars and taxis, or they won't be called taxis, are a thing, we'll be able to take one from Centennial Yards, and that's like something that's on the minds of the folks developing.
I'm 100% confident that's going to happen sooner than people think. And one of my pieces of evidence on that is I mentioned my mother's Irish. I have a lot of cousins, first cousins in Ireland. One of them owns a tool and die shop that does a lot of work for aerospace companies in Shannon, Ireland. So he's got 50, 60 guys working for him, and the majority of the parts he's making are for VTOL companies. Wow. So like I talked to him, a year ago, and he says, if anybody doubts that this is coming, I can show them my orders. That's all we're making is parts for various VTOL companies. So it'll be interesting to see who rises and who falls in that space, but it is undoubtedly coming. And in fact, places like China, they're already doing it.
Yeah.
We have to think about that. You have the busiest airport in the world just off in the distance there, and that's the way you're going to get to Centennial Yards. You're going to get in a pilotless vehicle, which, oh my God, that scares the hell out of me. But
it is wild to imagine. Talk about the civic coordination required to figure out how do you divvy up airspace, and then how many of those things can be flying around? What's the right number of them?
I know. It's a whole thing.
There's a shade perspective,
I know.
Flying through. It's gonna be nuts.
There's a whole regulatory thing there that I'm sure the U.S. government is thinking about and planning for, and the FAA and other entities. So that's something that I fully envision to be part of Centennial Yards.
Yeah. So fully, moving by 2030. World Cup's coming. 2 cranes out there now. There'll be 4 soon.
In September.
What keeps you up at night?
All of that. I mean.
What about more specifically?
Yeah, I'm kidding. Right now I'm feeling. I've been in the job 3 years now, and I feel better now than I ever have, because the original vision for everything from acquisition to financing to design and construction, everything seems to be, and leasing, everything seems to be kind of falling into place right now. And I'm probably sleeping better now than I have in 3 years. But we're under tremendous pressure and deadlines. I think that the World Cup definitely keeps me up at night. I mean, I'm always clear with people. We're not rushing and lowering the bar for World Cup. That would be foolish. We've seen conversations around the MARTA station on that. We're not rushing to get this complete by World Cup. What we're building, we would have built anyway. But I think we have this tremendous opportunity to deliver something that will make Atlanta proud. As the president of this company, deadlines are good, and it's an inspiring deadline, because what Atlantan doesn't want to show out for the World Cup? I mean, I think we all do. So this is our commitment, but there's a million things that have to line up perfectly in order for all that to happen. So we're a little over our skis on some things, but not in a bad way. That good feeling where you feel like you're under control, but you're moving at a good clip. So what keeps me up at night is to make sure that we don't lean too far and we don't lean too far back, but we stay at that good feeling of forward momentum, which is where we're at right now.
Yeah. Tough but important balance to find.
Tough but very important, critical, and I think I'm really fortunate. I work with a whole bunch of ass kickers here. These people are amazing at what they do, and I'm convinced if I told them in 2 years, I want you to build me a rocket ship that takes me to Mars, they could figure it out. They'd be able to do it.
They already got the vertical takeoff and landing spot.
Right, we already have that. I'm sure they come back in 2 weeks and say, here's the plan, Brian. These guys and women are just amazing. It's an amazing team of people that are here primarily because of the passion of doing something transformative for Atlanta. So whenever I interview, and I interview everybody, I ask them, why are you here? You could go build a building anywhere. You could build a building in Midtown, in Buckhead, or any other city in America. Why here? And it's, everybody answers the same way, because I want to be a part of doing something important, historic, and transformational. So that's what Centennial Yards is.
Yeah. You started to touch on something that I wanted to be sure to ask about, which, the word transformation kept coming up for me when I was preparing for this and thinking about the stops that you've made, going back to what you shared about what you were working on in the Obama administration. In between that and the Beltline and now Centennial Yards, there seems to be something that draws you to the transformative projects. What is that kind of deep why that it speaks to for the type of work you've chosen to pursue?
So I started my career and spent most of my career in government and public service. So I really think I'm a public servant at heart. I always will be, and to be able to be doing something that I know is going to leave a significant historic impact on a city is what motivates me. So everything from the EBO work that we're doing to the affordable housing that we're creating, to thinking about all the jobs that are going to be created, for the next 100 years in Centennial Yards, the lives that will start here. People will move to Atlanta and they'll live in Centennial Yards. They'll get married and their first apartment will be in Centennial Yards. They'll have their first kids in Centennial Yards. Like we're creating a really special place for people that's going to impact the historic trajectory of the city. So I think for me, as the first generation, I think I am Irish American. My family, a lot, my mother and my grandparents, they left Ireland because the Irish economy was suffering in those times in the 60s and the 20s, and they came here for opportunity. And I think I was raised with this real clear sense of how lucky we were to be American. And for me, that translates into giving back. I feel like I want to give something back, and I want to leave a legacy. I don't need my name attached to it. There's a lot of programs and government programs and things that I've created that exist today in California and other places that maybe nobody knows that I was involved in creating, and that's okay when I go back and I see it still exists and working and creating jobs or economic value and opportunity for somebody. That gives me pride. And for Centennial Yards, and same thing with like working in the White House. I'm the father of 5 sons, and I don't know any father that doesn't want to make their children, any parent that doesn't want to make their children proud of them. And Centennial Yards, I think, is another impactful legacy that my children, my grandchildren can look back on and say, "Hey, Grandpa worked on that. My grandpa did that." There's something motivational to me about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up your sons, because it's something I wanted to ask about. I think a lot of people listening to this are parents, and a lot of people are in the life phase where they're really trying to exert in a career and a profession, but they also want to be, really great on the home front. I'm curious what worked well, and then to use your question, like what would you have done differently?
It's a funny question, because I tease my sons. I raised 5 of them. 3 are, I say, off the payroll, and I have 2 left. So my oldest is 34, then I think 32, 29, about to be 30. I have these all wrong. Then 21, and then 17. And so we kind of raised them in 2 batches, So I think I practiced on the first 3 and got it right. And my oldest sons tease me about that. They're like, "Wow, I didn't get a car when I turned 17. I had to go buy a car." It's like, yeah, because I couldn't afford to give you a car. But I do think you definitely learn, like anything, as you raise kids. I think the older ones tend to teach you the lessons that you can apply on the younger ones. So the younger ones feel like the older ones think the younger ones are spoiled. They probably are, I would say. I mean, it's I think being a parent is one of the most important things, obviously, you can do. And you think about legacy and making sure you're raising good human beings that hopefully do good things for the world is probably the greatest legacy that you could leave the world. So I'm very focused on that with my sons. Yeah,
totally. How has that been in a role where you're obviously doing hard things at work, and you're thinking big, and you're out working? And then also, it's not like you were raising 2 kids. Like, you had a full home plate too, I'm sure.
That balance is like, that's another thing I learned, and I tell young fathers like you, one of the lessons I wish someone had told me when I was raising the older boys is you got to enjoy the moments, every moment. Like earlier in my career, I was one of those driving, focused, work all the time, translating that to, that makes me a good father because I'm providing for my kids. So the better I am at work and the more successful I'm at work, the better father I am. But that's not always the case. Spending time with your children is probably more important than anything. But it's a balance because you do have to provide for your children. You do want to leave a legacy for them, and you want them to be proud of what mom or dad accomplished. But at the same time, you almost have to savor the small moments more than anything. So those small intimate moments where you're one-on-one with your child and there's some memory or some funny, cool thing that they're doing, like you got to let those sink into your brain and never forget those moments.
Yeah.
Totally. And really, really enjoy those moments. Yeah. Like, as I manage people, my people will tell you that I always say family first. So if you're, you have a kid that's in Little League or whatever, and you want to be coach, go do it. I'm like, that's way more important than this, like way more important. Or if your son or daughter's sick or whatever, like take the time off and go be with them. Like that's way more important. I also think your employees, colleagues will be better when they are focused at work if you allow those for them to do those things. And earlier in my career, I didn't have bosses or supervisors that necessarily allowed for that. I kind of stuck to the book. You had a certain amount of vacation days, and if you took too many, it was frowned upon. That was kind of the way I looked at it. So don't work for companies that think like that.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Yeah.
So a few lightning round questions as we end, and of deliberately different levels of significance. One, what is your favorite Atlanta meal?
My favorite Atlanta meal. So I like, have you ever been to Real Taco?
You're the second person who said that in 2 weeks.
The burritos, the chicken burritos are the best. And I'm spoiled. I'm like, two things I'm spoiled with is pizza, because I grew up in New York and New Jersey, so it's really hard, and I'm very critical about pizza. And because I spent so many years in Southern California, Mexican food. So in all the years I've been in Atlanta, 10 years, never found like really great Mexican food that at least my taste enjoys. Real Tacos was it. I found a burrito.
David Jernigan, CEO of Metro Atlanta Boys and Girls Club, just said
really?
Real Tacos. Real Tacos, first 2-time mention on the Macon Atlanta podcast.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
Yeah, we're gonna hold an event there.
Should get a gift certificate or something for that.
That's crazy. All right. What do you think happens to us when we die?
I'm a Christian. I was born and raised Catholic. I'm a Christian. I think we go to heaven. I mean, that's what I believe, and I believe Jesus Christ, died on the cross for our sins, and that's what I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A favorite book that you'd recommend and why?
Oh, I mean,
you've already said Be Useful.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, I'm in the middle of it right now, and I'm sort of obsessed with it. Obviously Arnold wrote it, and a lot of those lessons in it I actually saw. So, but the reason why I like it so much is I get asked by a lot of if I had a group of MBA students here from Emory, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and somebody said, so what great business books are you reading? And I'm like, I don't read any business books. Like, I think, like, don't get jaded by somebody because they are a former CEO or they went to Harvard and got an MBA. No offense against anybody who went to Harvard. Friends who went to Harvard, it's fantastic to go to Harvard. But, like, be your own person. Don't kind of fall into the trap of, like, trying to do what somebody else did. Because first of all, you don't know if they actually did those things. You don't know, like they're writing books to sell them. So like, don't believe everything you read in a book. Let's put it that way. But Arnold's book I find slightly different because it's not like statistics and studies say it's more him just being direct and honest about what worked for him. And he's not saying, hey, you should do this. He's saying, this is what I did and this is what worked for me. And like, I'm going to have all of my sons listen or read this book because it's it's easily absorbed. It's not super complicated, and they're basic like life lessons. Like, I tried to teach my kids growing up that the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is usually not that much. Like, my kids play sports, and obviously they're students. And, the average person is going to put in the average number of hours in the gym, or the average number of hours studying, and they end up with an average grade. So if you just put in 20 more minutes on the lacrosse field, or half an hour more in the gym, you're going to be above average, right? Or if you study 30 minutes longer than the average, you're probably going to get a slightly better grade, which makes you above average. So I think that's one of the biggest messages I get out of that book, and I haven't finished it yet. I'm about halfway through it. Is you put the work in. The work is worth it, and it's satisfying, and it will make you a more useful human being. That's why it's called Be Useful.
Yeah, I love that. Even just the title, Be Useful.
Yeah, isn't that great? If everybody just kind of lived that, just live your life and be useful, because there's so many people who are not, which is sad. They think they're being useful, but they're deconstructive as opposed to constructive. Like, we're seeing that in our national politics. So much of it is deconstructive. It's tearing other people down and calling other people names, and even successful people, we mock and try to bring down successful people. It's a strange kind of thinking. Be useful. So,
you may be starting to answer my last question, but what's a habit you see us embracing in modern culture that you don't think serves us?
Yeah.
And what should we replace that with?
Yeah. I honestly think it's our, and I'll even point my finger at myself, as our addiction to our devices. You and I were talking before. I sit down with my two sons last night for dinner, and I look up, and they're both on their phones. Eating with one hand on the phone with the other hand. I'm like, put the phones down. And me included. I was doing it too. So I was like, let's put our phones down, and let's human connection and contact matters. And I think our national civil discourse has gotten so vitriolic in part that it's easy to be, say something horrible, nasty, like on a text or on social media. Yeah. But to actually say it to somebody's face is a different thing. To look somebody in the eye and call them a name is a different thing. And so I think we are being desensitized a bit to our humanity by not having to look someone in the eye and have a conversation. I think it desensitizes you.
Yeah. Real Tacos, the first 2-time winner, but being addicted to our phones as a habit, not serving us, not the first.
No, I'm
winner.
sure a lot of people say that.
Like, what do you think could and should and will course correct that? How does that get better?
I don't know. I could be doomsdayer and say, some tragedy at the national level. I don't even want to speculate what that could be, but I think a lot of it is just the way we raise our kids. So I know parents that restrict the number of hours because it really becomes addictive. It's an addictive. We know this, right? It's addictive being on your phone. So I think parenting matters when it comes to that. I think we need to. And I'm guilty, I don't do this, but probably should. I should probably put some restrictions on at least my high school son. The other ones are too late, about how many hours they spend on their phone. And this just encouraging of I think, we default to Teams meetings and Zoom meetings too much. I think it matters being physically in the same room with other human beings and interacting. It that can't substitute for that type of human interaction. So I think even as corporations, we should stop encouraging Teams and Zoom and get people in the same room. Yeah. I try to do that around here. I'm like, no, we're just gonna let's meet in person. Or people say, hey, let's do a Zoom call. I'm like, no, let's meet in person. It's like, we used to meet in person. Remember when we meet in person, you shake hands and you smile and you have small talk before and after the meeting, and we don't do that when we're on Zoom calls. It's like you miss a lot by doing that.
Yeah, I try to do as many of these in person for that reason. When I leave here today, I will feel like we know each other. And
I feel the same way.
And if we had just done,
definitely
pop on, it's a complete different.
Yeah, it's that physical connection and interaction matters. And I think we're losing that, but. Yeah, I'm not sure how you change that. It's almost a little. It's a scary question in a way, you know, because we're so over the top on all of that right now with all the, from TikTok to Instagram to, you know, X and Facebook. We're just so obsessed by this. And then my sister-in-law told me the other day, I might get this wrong, young people, don't mock me, but my nephew has like a Snapchat account, and that if you don't actively use it, your rating goes down or something like that. So you have to actively post things. So he was at a football camp, and so he was having his girlfriend post things for him so his rating didn't go down. Like, oh my God, that's horrible. Like, that's crazy to kind of live your life like that. We can't encourage, we have to discourage our children from doing that. Yeah. And that's really, I mean, you want to change it, you got to start with like the next generation. Like, how do you get people to, how do you get our children to think differently about these things? It's tough.
And in that regard, I got to think a place like Centennial Yards can be important if it is a thing that is compelling enough to get folks out of the house together, doing something. I think so, yeah. You know, breeding community and familiarity.
Yeah, and we're seeing that, like, you know, we're going to build a 5,000 seat music venue in Centennial Yards, and there'll be bars and restaurants and cool things to do, but I'm a big fan of live music. I go to music festivals and, you know, concerts as much as I can, live music. I love live music. And I do think like there's something magical about being in a room full of people all listening to the same song or watching the same sport or whatever it is. So we're actually seeing this, and Steve Koonin, the president of the Hawks and who runs the arena, says this all the time, that the concert business is way up because of that. People want to get out. They want that human interaction. I think we're tired of sitting on our phones for 5 hours before we go to bed or whatever. The numbers are crazy, how many hours people spend on the phone. As a matter of fact, Arnold talks about this, is if you want to be a productive, useful human being, what are you spending your day doing? Yeah. You know, you have 24 hours in a day. So he actually breaks it down. So how many hours are you sleeping? How many hours are you eating? How many hours are you at work? What do you have left? Yeah. Not that much. Yeah, you might have maybe 2 or 3 hours at the end of the day to do anything you want. Read a book, learn to play the guitar, go to the gym. You know, are you using that time to do something useful and productive, or are you on your phone wasting it? Yeah. So if you want to be great at something, don't do that. Don't be on your phone all the time. You know, spend that time doing something useful. Yeah, love it. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for spending the time. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you coming over. Hopefully a useful use of both of our afternoons. No, it was. I appreciate it. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Did a great job. Thank you. That's our show. Thank you very much, Brian, for coming on. Enjoying the view. And it's going to be fun to look back at that footage and see Atlanta and looking out on the Gulch when there were no skyscrapers there, and see what's coming for downtown Atlanta that I think all of us can be excited about. There's already been some big announcements, even since we recorded this. And I think there's more coming soon. So really excited to be on the lookout and see all the 2026 World Cup, if not before, in Centennial Yards. Thanks.